Blood was said to be stronger than water, a bond that could never be broken. But for Claudia, blood had lost all meaning. To her brothers, it was nothing more than a form of payment. Rain poured heavily as she stood near the edge of their dying territory, the cold seeping into her bones. From a distance, she watched Colton and Wyatt stand beneath a flickering streetlight, opening a briefcase filled with neatly stacked cash. Their faces glowed with relief, even excitement. They weren't just finalizing a land deal. They were selling her future. The name Roman Fontana echoed in her mind like a death sentence. The Alpha King, a ruler feared across Pax, known for wiping out entire bloodlines without mercy. By dawn, she would belong to him. Colton and Wyatt believed they had won. Their gambling debts, millions owed to ruthless syndicates, would finally be cleared. They thought sacrificing their sister made them clever, even powerful. What they failed to understand was that Claudia was not a burden they were discarding. She was a force they were handing over to a king who had been waiting. Once, this land had thrived under their father's rule. The pack had respected their family name. Now, everything was rotting, territory shrinking, alliances broken, reputation shattered. And Claudia had paid the price long before tonight. She had learned how to survive quietly, how to stay invisible. Since the night her parents died in a suspicious crash, she had become a shadow in her own home. Her brothers took control and burned everything their father had built. As thunder rolled above her, Claudia felt something shift deep inside her chest. This wasn't just fear. It was the beginning of something irreversible. By sunrise, her life would no longer be her own. And the game, one soaked in blood, power, and vengeance, had only just begun. The family estate felt heavier than ever, as if its walls were slowly closing in on Claudia. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale alcohol and expensive cigars, a scent she had come to associate with arguments, threats, and bad decisions. This house had once been a symbol of pride, a place where the pack gathered with respect under her father's command. Now, it was nothing more than a decaying shell. Claudia stood near the fireplace, folding clothes with careful precision. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. Being invisible had become her strongest survival skill. Over the past 3 years, she had learned that silence kept her safe. Since the night her parents died in a so-called accident, everything had changed. Colton and Wyatt had taken over the pack, believing power was their birthright. Instead of protecting it, they drained it dry. Illegal fighting rings, reckless gambling, broken alliances. Each decision pushed the pack closer to collapse. She listened quietly as raised voices echoed through the room. Wyatt's anxiety was obvious. He paced back and forth, arguing that dealing with Roman Fontana was madness. The Alpha King didn't negotiate. He dominated. Anyone who crossed him vanished. Colton, however, remained calm, too calm. He sat in their father's old chair, exuding false confidence. The syndicate wanted their money, and time was running out. If they failed to pay, death would be brutal and public. Claudia felt a knot tighten in her chest as she realized they weren't just discussing land. Something darker hung in the air, something personal. She kept her head down, pretending not to hear, pretending not to exist. But deep inside, dread crept through her veins. This house no longer protected her, and whatever decision her brothers were about to make would destroy what little safety she had left. The argument between the brothers grew louder, their voices slicing through the tense air like knives. Claudia tried to focus on the laundry in her hands, but every word pulled her closer to the truth she was desperately avoiding. Wyatt paced across the room, his boots leaving faint marks on the already ruined rug. His voice was low but sharp, filled with panic. Dealing with Roman Fontana was insanity. Everyone knew the Alpha King didn't make fair bargains. He took what he wanted and destroyed whatever stood in his way. Approaching him wasn't a solution. It was an invitation to execution. Colton scoffed at his brother's fear. He leaned back in their father's leather chair, cigar smoke curling lazily around his head like a crown of arrogance. To him, fear was a weakness. Numbers were what mattered, and the numbers were unforgiving. 3 million. That was the price on their heads. The syndicate had been patient long enough. If the money wasn't paid by Friday, there would be no escape. No mercy. Colton explained it coldly, as if discussing a business expense rather than their lives. Fontana, Colton argued, was expanding his territory. He wanted the northern pass, strategic land that connected key trade routes. They owned the deed. That alone should have been enough. But even as Colton spoke, Claudia felt a creeping chill crawl up her spine. There was something else in his tone, something unspoken. Wyatt stopped pacing, realization slowly dawning on his face. Land wouldn't erase a debt of that size. Roman Fontana had wealth beyond imagination. He didn't need scraps. What else do we have? Wyatt asked quietly. Colton's eyes flickered toward Claudia. In that moment, her breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. A terrible understanding settled in her chest like a weight. She wasn't just listening to a conversation anymore. She was the solution. The moment Colton's gaze settled on Claudia, the room seemed to grow colder. His eyes didn't hold warmth or hesitation, only calculation. Claudia's fingers tightened around the fabric she was folding, her instincts screaming at her to run, even though her feet refused to move. Wyatt followed his brother's stare, and the color drained from his face. Understanding struck him like a blow. He shook his head slowly, disbelief and guilt twisting his expression. "No," he muttered. "That's not enough. You can't be serious." Colton exhaled smoke and leaned forward, his voice dropping into something dark and deliberate. Roman Fontana needed more than land. The council was pressuring him. An alpha king without a mate or heir was seen as unstable. What he needed was a woman with a pure bloodline, someone valuable enough to secure his legacy, yet isolated enough to avoid political complications. Claudia felt her chest tighten as if the air had been sucked from the room. Her hand slipped, and the laundry basket crashed to the floor. The sound echoed sharply, exposing her presence. Both brothers turned toward her. Colton smiled, but there was no affection in it. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered his prey. He rose from the chair and approached her slowly, his confidence unshaken. "No," Claudia whispered, stepping back. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. "You can't do this." Her parents were gone, Colton reminded her coldly. The debts remained. The pack hated them. And she, he claimed, had been living under their roof without contributing enough to matter. Anger surged through her fear. She protested, listing everything she had done to hold the pack together while they destroyed it. But her words fell on deaf ears. To Colton, the decision was already made. And Claudia realized, with terrifying clarity, that her brothers had just signed her life away. Claudia's heart pounded violently as Colton closed the distance between them. The smell of alcohol clung to him, sharp and suffocating. His presence felt overwhelming, like a shadow blocking out every possible escape. She lifted her chin, forcing herself not to shrink back, even as fear clawed at her chest. "I run this house," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "I cook for the pack. I clean. I manage the accounts you destroyed. I kept this place standing while you gambled it away." For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Wyatt turned his face away, unable to meet her eyes. Shame etched deep into his expression, but he said nothing. His silence hurt almost as much as Colton's cruelty. Colton laughed softly, unimpressed. He reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was rough, bruising. "You're not furniture," he sneered. "Furniture loses value. You don't." The words made her stomach twist. He spoke of her bloodline as if it were merchandise, pure, valuable, desirable. Roman Fontana had agreed to meet. Midnight. The border bridge. Cash in exchange for land rights, and her. Claudia's vision blurred with tears. Roman Fontana was a monster. Everyone knew the stories. How he slaughtered rivals. How entire packs vanished under his rule. She begged them to reconsider, to remember she was their sister. Colton shoved her backward. She stumbled, barely catching herself on the sofa. His voice was ice-cold as he delivered his final threat. If Roman rejected the deal, the syndicate would take her instead. And that, he said calmly, would be far worse. The decision was final. As Claudia fled the room, her legs weak beneath her, she realized something devastating. Her brothers weren't just betraying her. They were choosing her death to save their own lives. Claudia ran upstairs, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she reached her room. She slammed the door shut and turned the lock, though she knew it wouldn't stop them if they truly wanted to break in. Her back slid down against the wood until she was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her mind raced with one desperate thought: escape. But reality crushed it almost instantly. She had no money, no car, and no allies left in the pack. An unmated she-wolf without protection would be forced to live as a rogue. Rogues were hunted, used as sport. Survival outside a pack was a slow death sentence. Tears blurred her vision as she stood and walked toward the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her skin was pale, her dark hair tangled, and her eyes, one icy blue, the other flecked with gold, stared back with haunted intensity. Her brothers had always called her mismatched eyes a flaw, something unnatural. She pressed her hand against the glass, steadying herself. Roman Fontana. The name alone carried fear across the continent. The alpha of alphas. Cold, ruthless, untouchable. A man who ruled through strength and blood. The thought of belonging to him made her stomach twist. Downstairs, she heard Colton laughing, already celebrating money he hadn't even received. The sound hardened something inside her. Claudia wiped her tears away. She would not be dragged away screaming. If this was the end of her freedom, she would face it with dignity. She grabbed a small duffel bag and packed only what mattered. One simple dress, a worn photograph of her parents, and a silver dagger her father had given her on her 18th birthday. Clutching the cold metal, she made herself a promise. If Roman Fontana tried to hurt her, she might not survive, but she would make him bleed. The rain was relentless as Claudia was forced into the back seat of the black SUV. Cold water soaked through her dress, clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle pulled away from the estate that had never truly felt like home. Two of Colton's enforcers sat on either side of her. Their presence was heavy, watchful. They weren't there to protect her. They were there to make sure she didn't escape. Every sharp turn, every bump in the road reminded her how little control she had left. Colton sat in the front passenger seat, repeatedly checking his phone. His irritation was clear. "Stop shaking," he snapped without looking back. Fontana hates weakness. Claudia straightened her spine, refusing to give him the satisfaction. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "I'm cold." The broken heater was just another reminder of how badly her brothers had neglected everything, including her. The SUV slowed as they approached the border bridge. Steel beams rose out of the darkness, slick with rain and glowing faintly under distant lights. This bridge marked the boundary between two worlds, her family's failing territory and the powerful land of the ironclad pack. On the far side, several black SUVs waited, their headlights cutting through the storm like blades. The sight made her heart sink. The car came to a stop. The enforcers opened the door and pulled her out. Rain immediately plastered her hair to her face as the wind howled across the bridge. Colton and Wyatt stepped ahead, carrying the briefcase containing the land deeds. Claudia was shoved forward behind them. As she lifted her gaze, she saw a towering figure step out from the lead vehicle. Even through the rain, his presence was overwhelming. Roman Fontana had arrived. The man who stepped forward from the lead SUV didn't rush. He moved with controlled confidence, as if the storm itself bent around him. Even from a distance, Claudia could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her chest. Roman Fontana was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, solid, unmistakably powerful. A black umbrella rested in his hand, though the rain soaked the edges of his tailored suit. He didn't seem to care. Four guards flanked him, each one alert and deadly, their attention fixed on every possible threat. As Colton approached, his confident stride faltered. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to tighten. Roman's aura was overwhelming, pure alpha dominance, ancient and suffocating. It made Claudia's pulse race. When she finally saw his face clearly, her breath caught. His features were sharp and commanding, his dark hair untouched by the rain. But it was his eyes that held her captive, steel gray and faintly glowing. They locked onto her with startling intensity. Roman didn't glance at the briefcase. He didn't acknowledge Colton's forced smile. His attention never left Claudia. Something shifted inside her. Fear twisted into something else, something deeper and more dangerous. A strange pull snapped through her chest, powerful and undeniable. Her wolf, long silent, stirred violently. "Mate." The word echoed in her mind, stealing her breath. Claudia gasped softly, shaking her head in disbelief. This couldn't be real. It had to be panic. Roman took a step closer. His guards tensed, but he lifted a hand, signaling them to stand down. He passed Colton without a glance, ignoring the hand extended toward him. Colton hesitated. Alpha Fontana, he shouted over the wind. We have the land deeds, and the girl. Roman stopped in front of Claudia, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body despite the rain. And in that moment, Claudia knew. Whatever happened next would change her life forever. Roman stood only a few steps away from Claudia, his towering presence making the world around her fade into nothing. The rain continued to pour, soaking her hair and clothes, yet he seemed unaffected by the storm. His steel-gray eyes remained fixed on her face, studying her as if she were something precious he feared might disappear. Colton cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the silence. He lifted the briefcase slightly, trying to regain control of the situation. The land rights are all there, he said quickly. As agreed. Roman didn't look at the case. Instead, he took another step forward. Then, without warning, he tilted his umbrella, positioning it above Claudia's head. The rain stopped hitting her face, leaving only the sound of the storm around them. The sudden shelter felt unreal. The quiet between them was heavier than the thunder. Roman's gaze dropped briefly to her mismatched eyes, lingering there with something close to disbelief. Claudia, he said at last. It wasn't a question. It was certainty. Her breath hitched. You know my name? She whispered. He didn't answer. His focus shifted slowly, dangerously, toward Colton. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal. You put her in the trunk? Roman asked, his voice calm, but deadly. Colton stiffened. No. Back seat, he stammered. Look, Fontana, the deal was clear. 3 million. She's healthy, good bloodline. She'll give you strong heirs. The words made Claudia's stomach turn. Roman turned back to her. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand toward her, palm open, offering rather than taking. Come, he said quietly. Claudia looked at his hand, then at her brother's. Colton's greed was obvious. Wyatt looked pale, shaken. In that moment, she made a choice. She placed her trembling hand into Roman Fontana's. And everything changed. The instant Claudia's hand met Roman's, an electric jolt ran through her. It wasn't pain, but something far more powerful, magnetic, undeniable. Roman's fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, pulling her slightly closer. She felt his presence like a shield, impenetrable and commanding. Colton's confident smirk faltered, his bravado vanishing under Roman's gaze. Wyatt's face was pale, eyes wide with realization that they were no longer in control. Roman didn't look at the briefcase or at Colton. His attention remained fixed entirely on Claudia. Every subtle movement of her body, the slight tremor in her fingers, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He observed it all, focused and protective. It wasn't a leering stare. It was careful, almost reverent, like he was reading her very soul. Get in the car, Roman murmured softly, his voice low but firm. Claudia hesitated, confused. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible over the wind and rain. I didn't buy you, he whispered, leaning slightly so that his lips brushed her ear. The words were for her alone. I retrieved you. For 10 years, I have dreamt of a woman with one blue eye and one gold eye. I didn't know you were real until now. Her heart hammered against her chest. Breathless, she wanted to speak, to question, but nothing came out. She could only stare at him, realizing that everything she had feared, every story about Roman Fontana, was being replaced by something entirely new and incomprehensible. His grip remained steady, protective, commanding. The storm around them seemed to pause, holding its breath. Now, Roman said, glancing briefly at her brothers, his voice cutting through the tension. I will find out why they thought they could sell my mate like property. He guided her gently into the back of the armored SUV, shutting out the rain, the storm, and her family behind them. Claudia realized, with a mix of fear and awe, that she had not been sold to a monster. She had been returned to the One Ma. The armored SUV rumbled over the slick roads, the rain drumming against its roof like a relentless warning. Claudia sat clutching Roman's jacket around her shoulders, still damp from the storm, trying to process everything that had happened. The world outside blurred as neon lights streaked across the windows. Roman sat opposite her, eyes fixed on her with unwavering intensity. He didn't check his phone, didn't glance out at the passing city lights. Every so often, his gaze flicked to the slightest movement, her trembling hands, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. It was careful, precise, and impossibly intimate. She had expected cruelty, but instead found something far stranger, protectiveness. "You're hungry," he said suddenly, his voice soft yet commanding. Claudia jumped. "I'm fine," she replied, trying to mask the flutter of panic in her stomach. "Your heart rate spikes when your stomach growls," he observed. "You haven't eaten since breakfast." Before she could protest, he reached into a cooler built into the center console and pulled out fresh fruit and a protein shake. He placed them gently between them. "Eat," he said, simple and firm. Pride warred with survival. She wanted to refuse, to show she wasn't weak. Yet the hunger in her stomach was undeniable. She opened the container, taking a strawberry. Sweet, ripe, and more luxurious than anything she had touched in years. As she ate, a strange warmth began to spread inside her, not from the food, but from his attentiveness. Crossing the ironclad boundary, the landscape shifted. Rugged, crumbling roads gave way to smooth, well-guarded paths. Patrol towers lined the road, each guarded by alert pack members who saluted as the SUV passed. This was no ordinary territory. This was a fortress, a realm where Roman ruled with authority and military precision. Claudia pressed herself against the door, realizing fully that she had entered a world far beyond anything she had known. And for the first time, she understood. The SUV climbed the steep mountain road, finally arriving at the Citadel, a towering structure of glass, steel, and dark stone. Perched high above the valley, it dominated the landscape. Claudia stepped out, awed and intimidated. The size alone was staggering, but the precision of its design left her breathless. Dozens of pack members lined the steps, their heads bowed as Roman approached. Servants, guards, and administrators alike moved with impeccable discipline. Yet when their eyes flicked toward Claudia, confusion and curiosity shone through. Who was this girl in the Alpha's jacket? Why had he brought her here? Roman seemed to sense her discomfort. He moved closer, his shoulder brushing against hers, a protective wall between her and the stares of the crowd. His hand rested briefly on the small of her back, guiding her silently inside. "Clear the hall," he commanded, his voice resonating through the courtyard. Within moments, the staff scattered, leaving the expansive foyer empty. Instead of leading her to a guest wing or servant quarters, Roman directed her to the top floor, the Alpha's personal domain. Claudia felt her heart skip. This was the floor where he lived, ruled, and made decisions that affected thousands. And now, she was being brought here. When he opened the double doors, Claudia gasped. The bedroom suite was massive, larger than the entire ground floor of her old family home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the storm-lashed city below. The fire crackling in the stone hearth added warmth, but it wasn't the luxury that caught her breath. It was the details. A vase of blue hydrangeas, her mother's favorite, sat on the bedside table. A vintage copy of Wuthering Heights rested on a reading chair, the very edition she had cherished years ago. And on the bed lay a silk nightgown in emerald green, the exact shade she had always loved. Claudia spun around to face Roman. "What is this?" she whispered, trembling. "Did you have my brother's SP?" Claudia's knees nearly gave out as she took in the room. Every object, every detail, felt deeply personal. It was as if Roman had reached inside her memories and recreated them in the space around him. The vase of blue hydrangeas, her mother's favorite flower. The worn copy of Wuthering Heights, the very edition she had treasured. The emerald green silk nightgown, exactly the color she always dreamed in. Each piece seemed to whisper, "I know you." Her voice trembled as she faced him. This isn't some trick? You didn't send my brothers to spy on me?" Roman's expression softened, his eyes betraying a flicker of pain quickly replaced by determination. "Your brothers are idiots. They couldn't understand you, let alone protect you. I have searched for you for a decade. I have dreamed of you every night. And now you are here." Claudia's heart raced. Dreams weren't supposed to be real, were they? She had always believed in them as escapes from her broken world, never imagining someone else could share them, foresee them, or long for them. Roman stepped closer, shedding his vest to reveal a tailored shirt beneath. His presence was overwhelming, primal, yet oddly comforting. He moved carefully, with respect, but there was an undeniable intensity in the way he regarded her. "I would have paid anything to get to you," he said quietly. "I would have burned the world to have you safe. I did not buy you. I retrieved you." and I will never let anything harm you. Claudia's fingers brushed against her own face, disbelief and awe mingling in equal measure. She felt the weight of his words, the gravity of the promise he made. For the first time in years, she sensed she wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a breeder. She was something else, something powerful. She was the queen of this pack, whether she realized it yet or not. Claudia's mind spun as Roman led her toward the adjoining room. Every step echoed with authority, a rhythm that reminded her just how different this world was from her old, crumbling home. She felt both terrified and oddly safe, trapped between fear and fascination. Roman paused at the door, his hand brushing lightly against the small of her back, guiding her with a possessive, yet protective touch. "The bath is drawn," he murmured. "Rest. We have a war to fight tomorrow." Claudia froze. "What war?" she asked, bewildered, her voice barely audible. Roman's steel-gray eyes met hers, haunted yet resolute. "The war to keep you," he said simply. "Now that I have you, the world will try to take you away. The council, rivals, enemies, all will see you as a prize, and I will not allow it." Her stomach twisted. For years, she had expected cruelty, confinement, and betrayal. Instead, she found devotion, intensity, and a promise of protection she couldn't fully understand. The weight of his words settled over her like a shield, but the magnitude of what was coming made her pulse quicken with dread. She followed him to the doorway of the bath, the warm steam curling around them, masking the storm outside. Roman lingered, his gaze unreadable, yet intensely fixed on her. He wasn't demanding obedience. He wasn't issuing threats. He was issuing a vow. Claudia swallowed, her fingers clutching the silk of his jacket. Fear and awe battled inside her. She had been delivered from danger by a man who seemed as formidable as he was enigmatic, and yet, she realized, he expected nothing but her trust. As Roman stepped back, allowing her privacy, Claudia finally exhaled. For the first time, she felt the tiniest spark of hope. Tomorrow would bring battles, literal and figurative, but for now, she could breathe, even if only for a moment. The storm outside raged on, but inside, she felt the faint warmth of sanctuary. The morning sun pierced through the glass walls of the citadel, scattering light across Claudia's room. She stirred, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger under her pillow. It took her a moment to remember she wasn't in her cramped attic anymore. She was somewhere far beyond anything she had imagined. Safe, yet still at the center of a storm she could not yet see. The events of the previous night rushed back. The bridge, the rain, her brother's betrayal, and Roman's presence. So commanding, so impossible. She rose, slipping into the clothes laid out for her. Everything fit perfectly, as if made for her alone. Even the simplicity of dark jeans and a cashmere sweater felt like armor. Cautiously, she left the room, moving down the grand staircase. The scent of coffee guided her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The household was quiet, as though everyone sensed Roman's unspoken rule: respect him or step aside. Claudia realized that the world she had entered was nothing like the one she had left. Every detail, every person, was part of a larger machine that revolved around Roman. Here, he was alpha not only by strength, but by loyalty and fear intertwined. And she, though young, untested, and unsure, was now the pivot upon which countless plans and rivalries would turn. The realization was terrifying, but with it came a strange sense of empowerment. She had survived betrayal, fear, and the weight of her own grief. Now, she would face enemies, council pressures, and a world intent on challenging her place. Yet, for the first time in her life, Claudia understood one undeniable truth: she wasn't alone. Roman Fontana, the man of her dreams and her reality, had chosen her, protected her, and would fight beside her. As she stood at the top of the staircase, sunlight warming her face, she made a silent vow. The game had only begun, and she would not be a pawn. She would be a queen.